what I was looking around, I was like, wow, what can I give my boys to read for scriptures that aren't the scriptures, but that are introducing them to these stories? Came across the Golden Plates graphic novels by Michael Allred. He had done them back in 2004, and they had done a limited edition run of those at Deseret Book, and then they kind of disappeared.
We're not saying that these should replace the scriptures, but what I have found is these are helpful aids to on-ramp your kids to the scriptures.
When you watch a film, you can't really control the speed of the film. You can't control the pacing. But when you read a graphic novel, when you're visually looking at a scene, if you haven't understood everything that's happening, you don't move, your eyes don't move till the next frame until you're ready. And so you start absorbing information at your own pace. And this is part of why graphic novels are more powerful than regular just illustrated stories where you have text on one side and an illustration on the other side.
This is like the Book of Mormon, like DC Marvel. Like it's like a hero. And we always do. I just love the idea of taking these characters and making them incredibly heroic and masculine for our boys, because they're supposed to somewhat idolize and look up to them. And the graphics are so good. Like,
the restoration of the priesthood is just as relevant to you as a woman.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel. This is Women of Priesthood. I have a special guest today. This is my friend Andrew Knaupp. He wrote and illustrated he co-wrote and his friend illustrated a really cool project. They made the Book of Mormon and several of the kind of Doctrine and Covenants into a graphic novel for boys. And I invited him on here because I'm really excited about this, because I think I was telling Andrew, my oldest son had a really hard time learning how to read. And the only way we were really able to get him interested and motivated was to find these spy camp graphic novels. And it really helped him just like get excited about it. So I wondered if you would talk about how you got the motivation to do this, what inspired you to do this.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it a lot. So I grew up reading graphic novels as a young man, and they're very different. A lot of times people don't understand the difference between just like a children's illustrated storybook and a graphic novel. Graphic novels actually combine elements of film and elements that regular reading doesn't have, regular illustrated stories don't have. So I really like the medium of graphic novels, and I thought, man, I wish there were graphic novels about the church, about the Book of Mormon, about our history. There are some Bible graphic novels out there, some Christian ones, but we didn't really have any ones that were unique to Latter-day Saints. And so I had studied it. I actually went to school at BYU and I got a degree in illustration. And so I had an art background, and I actually ended up going more into graphic design, but I still had this love for illustration. And so what I started trying to do was I started watching to see if anybody else had done anything. And I kind of wanted to support it and get behind it. And it first actually started out with a book that the very first graphic novel that most people don't know was actually this book, The Book of Mormon on Trial.
That's right.
And it actually came out in the 70s. And many of your viewers may have seen it. It was black and white, and it had all these cool illustrations talking about evidences that show that the Book of Mormon is true. It took an otherwise kind of dry subject like Book of Mormon archaeology and what about the three witnesses, and it made it in this humorous book. So in 2003, I was approached by the author's son of the original edition, who asked me to help make a third edition and add all of the new evidences to the original material. So that's how I kind of started doing these books. I was doing research, I was doing graphic design, layout. I had a friend of mine, Adam Koford, who's done a lot of illustrations for the Friend magazine, who did new illustrations to add to the original book. So it started there. And then from there, I was looking around trying to see has anybody else done anything like this? Because I kind of wanted to bring them all under one roof. So the next thing I did is I came across the Golden Plates graphic novels by Michael Allred. He had done them back in 2004, and they had done a limited edition run of those at Deseret Book, and then they kind of disappeared. They were out of print, and I was like, wow, if you want to get copies, they're kind of expensive, they're kind of hard to find. And so Mike Allred had originally felt like he had to include all of the text straight from the Book of Mormon in scripture speak. And I was like, wow, the art is so great, but the wording is just a little too much for younger audiences. He was originally kind of shooting for older audiences. And so I approached him. I said, hey, let's bring the book back. Let me rewrite all the text. So I'll kind of abridge it, and keeping the core ideas and the doctrines right. We're not making up stuff, we're keeping it, but like kind of abbreviating it. Scriptures will repeat themselves a lot. And let's take it out of a lot of the formal speech. And so when we re-released this, originally was 3 issues that were 60 pages long. We re-released them as 6 20-page issues, so they're individually like this. And then this book is all 6 combined into one collection. But the idea was, okay, let's make this a little easier to read, and let's re-release it so that people can get copies without it costing a lot. And so I spent a lot of time, learned a ton. It's a little bit like translating, not quite, where you're like looking at old words and you're like, I would test it on my own kids. So my sons were a lot younger when I started this, so I would ask my 10-year-old, I say, when you hear abominable, what do you think of? They're like, the abominable snowman,
Yeah.
So we take for granted that a lot of words in the Book of Mormon are words that younger readers they just don't really know. What is the great and abominable church?
Yeah.
What is a spacious building?
I really like about highlighting this is one of the things we talked about on my channel is that in 2019, when President Nelson said, like, women have priesthood power through covenants, you're both responsible for the instruction of your children. That wasn't I think that might have been lost on my generation a little bit, because other generations of mothers and women said, oh, well, in the past, the dads were in charge of reading the scriptures. But there was kind of a shift in this energy of it's both of you. Both parents need to get their kids into the scriptures. And I have found that sometimes our expectations that are especially boys, like sometimes I feel like maybe we set ourselves up to fail, like you said, not knowing that we are expecting them to know what abomination or abominable means, or expecting them to get all these terms, or even the fact that so I was telling Andrew that I was chatting with my son's 2nd grade teacher, and this is the COVID generation, and she said across the board, all elementary school kids are behind in reading because of COVID, and it's hard for them to catch up, and it's discouraging for them to catch up, and they also are competing with video games. So this is a really great tool, I think, to like meet your boys where they're at. Like, wouldn't it be great if we could just sit quietly and read from like the canon? But I think it's more important to kind of meet them where they're at, and especially there's this really unique opportunity when they're young, like when they're like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I always say, like, they're still kind of bad at everything, but they want to do it with you. And so the spirit and excitement and interest in those stories is like the opportunity is like prime in those years.
Young men especially, they want heroes. They want to know who. My sons would be like in movies, they'd be like, Dad, who's the good guy in this movie and who's the bad guy? They want to know who's the hero, who's the villain. They like these archetypes, and it simplifies the world for them. And sometimes in modern storytelling and film, we have this sort of sympathetic villain where it's like, well, he's a villain, but don't really feel badly about it because he's the villain because he was made this way. Well, in the scripture stories, it's much more clear. You have clear heroes and clear villains, and God and the devil, right? The two extremes here, and I think that's part of why young men and boys really are drawn to superheroes. They're drawn to spies and action, because there's a clear target, there's an objective, and you can accomplish it, and it's done.
Yeah.
And men like to get things done. We like to check it off, it's done. We completed the task. And so with heroes and this sort of hero concept, you like to have a mission, a quest. And so, to talk about, competing for video games, YouTube is a huge thing. Young men watch YouTube all the time. And so one of the things about graphic novels is they're sort of a bridge between a visual element and reading. And because they have sequential art, when you watch a film, you can't really control the speed of the film. You can't control the pacing. You can pause the film, and you could rewind and fast forward. But the pacing of a film is determined by the director, okay? But when you read a graphic novel, when you're visually looking at a scene, if you haven't understood everything that's happening, you don't move, your eyes don't move till the next frame until you're ready. And so you start absorbing information at your own pace. And this is part of why graphic novels are more powerful than regular just illustrated stories where you have text on one side and an illustration on the other side, is that you have the sequentialness of the art that allows the reader to control the speed of the film, or to say, wow, I didn't notice that detail. I'm not going to move on until I'm ready. And then reading comprehension starts to go up because they're not feeling rushed. Or you show them a movie, and if they miss details, well, the movie's already gone by, right? And so it's a very unique medium where it's sort of this hybrid, again, between regular reading and watching a movie or a film. It's sort of somewhere in the middle, and it can really help young people to read.
It's like really in the early parts of the Nephi story, I was really impressed with the dialogue between the family members, Nephi's family members. There's a scene with like his sister getting involved and fighting Laban, or not fighting, but the dialogue between the family members was very personal. I like really appreciated that a young reader getting into this is going to hear the dynamics of the family, which we do read about, and it's as like micro level as the Book of Mormon gets. But I do feel like this goes a little deeper into like those personal family dynamics, and the dialogue really flows. Like from one picture to the next, it really flows. That stood out to me because I really can sense an effort to highlight Sariah and the wife of Nephi, and they were main characters too. They were involved. This is like the Book of Mormon, like DC Marvel. Like it's like a hero, and we always do. I just love the idea of taking these characters and making them incredibly heroic and masculine for our boys, because they're supposed to somewhat idolize and look up to them.
For sure. And I think with like my sons, I wanted them to learn to read the scriptures, personal study every day. And it was like, okay, you're 4, I want you to try to read scriptures for 4 minutes a day. And when you're 5, it's 5 minutes. And so, but like, if it's, you can't just give them the straight text of the scriptures. So I was always looking around, and I was like, okay, so you have the Book of Mormon reader, you have the New Testament readers, the church's, illustrated books for young kids. But as I was reading them, the pictures were pretty good. But I noticed that like the message was just really, really, really simplified. And it was almost like for really like really young, like 3 or 4 year olds. And as soon as your boys hit 6, they think they should be reading 8. They always think they should be older.
My son was, it was so painful to get him to learn how to read. And he was also miserable. And I actually did struggle learning to read as well. And it wasn't until I homeschooled and my mom picked up like Calvin and Hobbes comic books that I was like, for me, it was kind of like I just needed to find something that wasn't so miserable to read. And then I had this innate interest, right? And the interest turned to motivation. And with him, I was just like, we just need to find something he's interested in. And I think that reading the Book of Mormon as a family can be a painful, laborious process if it's miserable.
Right.
If you want your kids to be at a level that they're just maybe not at. And also, I guess I'll use a metaphor, like I knew a family that the parents were really like fit, and they wanted their kids to be really fit, but they made the process of exercise so militant that the kids hated it and never wanted to be, they didn't associate enjoyment with the exercise. And I think there's a lesson there for being goal-oriented, as we often are in the church, like very goal-oriented, and also not forgetting that like the scriptures are supposed to be enjoyable for them in the way that they're enjoyable for us. Maybe they become more deep and meaningful, but they have to start out being interesting first, and you get that aspirational kind of Odysseus on a quest feeling in the graphic novel, like you said, like a DC comic.
So when I was looking around, I was like, wow, what can I give my boys to read for scriptures that aren't the scriptures, but that are introducing them to these stories. And that's sort of when I started looking around trying to find these things. And I found a few, again, like the projects that I've talked about. And then I started making some new ones. So
Yeah. So what's interesting too, if you want to hold it up, because I think it shows better. For any of you who have like kids who are interested in illustrations, isn't it the back page of that? I think it's the back page of that Pillar of Light one has like, it like walks you through, illustrations and the process of illustrating.
How each page gets put together, how it gets colored, and to kind of help people understand really how much work went into every page. And sequential art is a little bit like doing, so let me give you an example. So like this page here, for example, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels on it, right? So each panel has its own composition and its own art, and sometimes different lighting, different angles. So it's really like, 6 pictures on this page. And so every page is planned and composed in a way to help tell the story. And it's actually a lot more effort than a single illustration that fills the page. But each panel is designed to show emotion or zoom in on the person's face or capture this mood, or like a camera angle in a film. And that's part of why people get drawn into a graphic novel differently than just a regular illustrated book, because it feels like it's moving with you. And so I started producing. I commissioned Salvaludo to work with me, who also was a Marvel artist. He actually did Black Panther.
Oh my gosh.
The Black Panther movie premiere. He was invited there because he was the single, he did the most issues of Black Panther of any individual artist ever. And he's a member of the church. And he agreed to come partner with me and do Pillar of Light, which is telling the first vision with all of the accounts. All the details of the accounts have slightly different details. And the church has never made a film that has all of the details from all of the accounts. All of the films that have been made have some of the details from some of the accounts, but none of them had all of the details. So we wanted to show that the accounts of the first vision all harmonize, because some of the attacks on Joseph Smith have been like, oh, they contradict each other. They don't. The accounts don't contradict. He just chose to emphasize different things.
If you're like into science fiction and you like the way that science fiction can kind of like make your gospel perceptions 3D, you'll love this. And I actually, because I mean, we're not saying that these should replace the scriptures, but what I have found is these are helpful aids to on-ramp your kids to the scriptures. So I'm from Sharon, Vermont, which is actually where Joseph Smith was born. And I grew up, I grew up with that story, like in my bones. My kids haven't, because we live so far away from there. But what I did was I read the comic. It took us like a week or two. Sorry, it's not a comic. I keep calling it a comic, but
it is.
They're
interchangeable.
It's much smaller. Like if you want to hold up the Pillar of Light, it's a much thinner, lighter book. It's probably like it's just a smaller. Pages, it's very easy. It's very easy read. So we read that, and then we read the Joseph Smith account, and it's almost like when you watched the Living Scripture movies as a kid, and you always kind of had that imagination, that visual image in your brain when you were reading the words. And the way you delivered the writing here is so exciting that, I just found that was a nice way to on-ramp them, because I have a 9-year-old, 7-year-old, 5-year-old, and baby. But the 5-year-old's not going to really, he can't read, but he can get impressions that are exciting to him